Why don't we get started? I'm sure more people will join, but thank you for taking the time. We're going to be talking about AI and security around AI. What frameworks exist, what implementation exists around security around AI. It is, of course, the hot topic of the day. Everybody talks about AI nowadays, so we thought it's important to talk about security around it too. For starters, just to introduce Accorian and what we do, who we are. We are a company that focuses on cybersecurity, and we help our clients think through their strategy. What do they care to around security? What is the data that they care about? How do they need to protect it? A lot of compliance work. So all the alphabet soup you can think of: HITRUST, SOC 2, HIPAA, ISO, GDPR, PCI. We are assessors for nearly all of that, and then a lot of security testing, right? So everything from external network pen test to application testing to AI prompt testing, we're involved in that as a company. So that's us and what we do. What differentiates Accorian, and I know some of you know us and some of you might not. 150 people focused on security. That's our focus area. We don't do anything else. A number of compliance and audit projects always in progress. Lots of our clients will do multiple compliance standards at the same time, and audit once for multiple compliance frameworks is part of what we do. We're also one of few 10 firms or less that does both the compliance and the testing, and they're accredited for both. So we really think about that as true security, right? So not just compliance for the sake of compliance, but how secure are you? Looking at things like red teaming, looking at things like pen testing, AI prompts, and looking at security and true security overall, which then leads to a number of pen tests that happen in the company. We have our own GRC platform. A number of our clients use it. It makes sense for them. And then as part of that, the ability to add staff to a project from a security perspective on large engagements as they're trying to put their security journey in place. So that's us in a nutshell. I'm going to introduce all the speakers because there are a number of us, and we're doing this webinar a bit differently. We wanted to have some more dialogue around it. I know it doesn't seem like it now. I'm doing all the speaking, but soon we'll have other people joining. Aditya, who's the co-founder along with me of Accorian, Sean, who is all things HITRUST usually, and then Kieran, who's all things non-HITRUST usually, right? So we wanted to have multiple people so they can have different points of views on something that is as important as AI and AI security right now, and get their perspective. Because as part of this, you'll realize there's no one framework, no one right answer that solves all your problems. If you do have questions, by the way, feel to put them in the chat. We will get to them near the end, but feel free to add them in so we can read them off. AI is the new gold rush. For some of us who are a bit older, we remember the dot-com days and the bubble, and how much there was around dot-com and internet at that point. AI feels very similar. Nearly every company is talking about AI. You go to LinkedIn, and it's all about AI nowadays. And for good reason, right? Widespread adoption. Everybody is trying something in AI, right? Whether it's, hey, let me just play with ChatGPT, or let me try to make my company more efficient, or let me do a startup around it. But 80% of enterprises are looking at AI, whether it's a SaaS tool or something internal. Data privacy concerns around with that have increased. How do you make sure what you're doing is secure? We're not sending confidential data out, and it's not being used to train, has become a bigger issue. AI breaches, whether it's hackers using AI to drive things, or more the case, putting confidential data into a system you shouldn't, has become part of the concern nowadays. And as part of that, this has happened because of the gold rush that is AI, as well as just SaaS tools, right? The prevalence of SaaS tools means anybody can become a shadow IT, shadow AI person, put down $30, $20 on a credit card per month and buy a tool, and before you know it, you have a security gap that's not accounted for. And all of that has also led to regulatory pressures, right? The EU has come out with new requirements around AI that they've rolled out. There are America's coming out with a bunch of executive actions around it, and other countries doing the same. So if you look at it, AI is part of the future, but how do you make it secure? How do you account for it? Is part of what we should be focused on as security professionals. And the biggest concern for CISOs, right? It's, you can't and shouldn't stop the AI movement. It's how do you make sure it's done without causing a larger disruption at a company level. And so it's more about how do you be part of that? How do you put the guardrails in place? That becomes important. And that's what we're going to be talking about for quite a bit.
Awesome. So while Premal, gave us a little 101 on AI, it's being the new gold rush, how it's the latest threat vector that's out there in the world of security. Frankly, let's talk about how does one really start operationalizing their AI effort internally and securely in their organization? Because one can have multiple ways of adopting AI. Either you can do the build versus buy. You can, either build your own model or buy an off-the-shelf tool. One thing is definitely, true. This isn't just an IT conversation or an innovation project anymore. It's truly security, governance, and strategy at its core. So, and as you are well aware, right, the build versus buy dilemma has existed forever in tech, right, and all the more in today in AI. And frankly, this is where most teams truly get stuck in their AI adoption journey. So do we build our own model or do we just buy a pre-trained third-party solution? Both of them sound great, right? Based on a survey, late 2024, over 53% of all companies were using a vendor supplied AI as compared to 47%, which were building something in-house, right? Now, while it might seem 50-50, that's actually a big shift from 2023, where nearly 80% of all companies relied on entirely on some third-party external AI tool, right? Which basically tells us two things, right? In 2025, enterprises and mid-sized companies are moving towards more control and customization. And frankly, how does one truly build a flexible and secure foundation really, really quickly? So I'll start by saying, if you're going down the third-party AI route, which is, definitely fast, it's more powerful, but it's risky, right? Like the likes of OpenAI or Anthropic or any vertical specific solution like a sales copilot or AI presentation builder, the big advantage that you're truly getting is speed, right? What you get access to is a powerful pre-trained model that often just works out of the box for your use case. So all you have to do is, like Premal said, put on a credit card and start using it. You can integrate through API and just get started. But all of this speed comes with trade-offs, right? The first being, can you truly trust the model not to learn from your data, right? This data is your sensitive data, your client data, your proprietary data. Second is, where is all of this data going and who can access it, right? And the last is, what's stopping your employees from pasting sensitive information into these tools, right? These are the real concerns of 2025. And in most cases, companies don't even know which tools are being used in shadow AI scenarios, right? Because like Premal said, anybody can get a credit card and just start subscribing to a new AI tool, right? That brings me to the other side, which is, you might consider building your own LLM or hosting an open source model like Llama or Mistral, right? But so that's of course an option. The third option, of course, is frankly building your own LLM. And this is in most cases off the table because unless you have a very large AI research team or millions of dollars lying around, which most of us may not, right? So that is where open source seems very, very attractive. It's free, it's flexible, but as an analogy that I often take, it's like getting free puppies, right? It's free up front, but it takes time, money, and expertise to feed them, walk them, clean up after them, and truly make sure they don't bite anyone. So the burden of the infrastructure, patching, AI governance is completely on you, right? But the benefit is that you control the model, the access of data, and what it learns, right? And that brings me to the second aspect, which is in 2025, a real world approach is going the hybrid way, which is using both right? And how do you, and that is truly becoming a very, very practical strategy in 2025. So we're seeing a lot of our clients use third-party tools for things like sales enablement or copywriting or marketing function or customer service, where speed matters and the risk is low, right? And they're using internally hosted LLMs wrapped around their core applications for things that touch sensitive data, internal logic, or anything associated with the client, right? And that is where they're, making the most of both the best world, the best of both worlds, right? And and that brings me to the next aspect, which is whether you're truly building or buying, right? The security principles don't really change. It's the very same way how you first went to the cloud, right? So whether it's policy and governance, you have to still define what's acceptable use. You need to set clear roles and responsibilities. You need to have continuous monitoring in place because your AI stack can't be in a black box on its own doing whatever it needs to do, right? Someone still has to go ahead and monitor the data flows, the prompt histories, the model outputs, and frankly, any anomaly that might be happening. So say someone's trying to access core critical financial data, right? Someone has to be flagged about it, right? It's very, very important to have this level of anomaly detection. And lastly, training and awareness is core, right? Your people are frankly your first line of defense and also your weakest, right? That doesn't change, right? So you need to train them not to drop sensitive data into third-party AI, not to drop customer information into public AI tools without pre-vetting, and truly help them understand what are the risks behind some of this magic, right? And have a workflow in which you have pre-vetted AI solutions and the like of the likes of all of that. So on the operationalizing your AI front, my big takeaway, it's not about picking one path, right? It's truly answering three big questions: is where do you need governance? What are you okay outsourcing? And what do you absolutely need to bring or keep in-house, right? And if you're able to answer this, you're frankly ahead of the curve in most cases. In the next slide, I'm talking about how security applies to both of these implementations. So you can see, we have the third-party tools and LLMs. We also have self-hosted and self-built LLMs. I want to start by saying that when you're thinking about securing your AI implementation, right? Whether it's a commercial LLM or building your own, you need to treat it like a supply chain problem. It's no different from when you start to adopt the cloud or you work with a new outsourcing ID vendor or move to a new managed security service provider or a service provider, right? The fundamentals haven't changed, right? Whether it's vendor risk, whether it's asset inventory, whether it's access management, governance, compliance, shared responsibilities, they're all the same, right? They actually matter a lot more today in the world of AI, right? As we foresee that a majority of enterprise workloads are going to be either, are going to be on AI, right? And that is where robust vendor vetting is non-negotiable today, right? We were talking to a couple of CIOs and CISOs recently, and we got to know that data privacy and compliance is definitely the number one blocker to AI adoption, right? And that's because most companies lack the visibility into knowing what are these AI vendors doing with their data, how are they storing it, how are they utilizing it, how are they training their models, right? And almost all businesses today need to showcase some level of assurance to their customers, and thus by virtue of that, they need to show that their AI usage is compliant. There's recently a story that I heard in which a CIO of a very large bank ended a big contract with their IT service provider because they got to know that their data was being used to train a model and automate workflows without their permission, right? So, like I said, the core security principles still remain the same, but today they have an AI nuance. What are some of those AI nuances, right? Whether it's on the learning front, can you disable training on your data? On the API side, is there adequate controls to safeguard authentication with GenAI platforms? On the modeling side, is there ability to monitor if malicious input is going in and if there's a drift in behavior? Or lastly, if suppose it's self-hosted LLM, are you keeping up with patching, optimization, and resource scaling, right? And then, all of this kind of, it's the same principles, it's just a new territory. And frankly, the playbook for security is only evolving. It's not being rewritten, right? So in the next 3 slides, Sean's going to be talking about risks and mitigation for third-party tools and third-party AI tools. And Kiran's going to be discussing about how self-hosted and self-built LLMs have and what are the risks and what are the mitigations that one can have in place. So we'll start off with something very important, which is the infrastructure, ownership, platform, and vendor. Sushan?
Gotta turn on the microphone. So thanks, Adi. Yeah. So the approach is going to be, we'll talk about some of the the higher areas of concern when we're looking at the AI risks side of the house. We want to again emphasize basic hygiene when it comes to this stuff. We want to make sure that at the end of the day you're not really doing anything more than you should already be doing. You just need to broaden your horizons and broaden your scope of what you're doing out here. So as we look at things, whether it be from a third party tool or something you're building in-house, these standard practices and some of these preventative things, you should be doing anyway, regardless of whether or not you have AI, in your organization or not. But today we'll talk specifically around what it means, if you're looking at or you currently are, implementing AI out in your organization. So, key things we want to look at from the infrastructure ownership, platform, and vendor risk side. Obviously risk assessments. We're a compliance company, so we're going to come back to you and say, hey, you got to have standards, you got to have controls. How are you doing? Doing this. What are you managing it to? So we want to make sure that we're looking at what your organization's goals are and what you're trying to accomplish. So we're going to look at things like SOC 2 type 2 or ISO 27001 to start with, and then we'll look at specific frameworks around AI. And we'll talk more later on about, who's, from a framework perspective, who's doing what in the AI world. But, again, we want to make sure that, you're doing these different, risk assessments, you're following, good hygiene with different frameworks, performing your annual audits and having third-party testing and things like Permal mentioned earlier, red teaming, pen testing. Those are things that you should be doing anyway, but we want to make sure that we're focused directly on, where the impact will be from the AI side. When we're looking at like configuration guardrails, backup and redundancy, again, these are things that, we should be doing there. From configuration, probably the big thing to call out here is monitoring and rotating your API keys. We see this a lot with non-AI stuff. We have, issues that are currently out there now where, if you're not rotating your API keys or you're not, controlling them correctly, we're gonna see issues in your environment. You're vulnerable, from that. So make sure that we're updating that kind of stuff. We want to look at specifically today, we'll talk about multi-vendor strategies with the AI and managing your LLM. So when we're looking at, some of the best practices here from a risk perspective, we want to look at, is it something that from a multi-vendor perspective, should you be looking at multiple LLMs from like maybe one that does all your summations, versus just, doing general chat for your end users, versus a code generator that your development staff is using. And then, we want to look at like the data abstraction stuff. Make sure you implement data schemes and versioning. And again, your development side of the house, if this is where, your guys are spending a lot of effort. And again, we'll talk more about, OWASP and some best practices. But, we want to make sure that, you have the appropriate data schemes and versioning out there. You're following, the standard practices from that perspective, and avoid, relying on vendor-specific enhancements. And I think we've seen a lot of this already, where organizations are going to third parties, they're implementing AI, but they're not doing a lot of it themselves. They're relying on the third party to provide the solution. And it's opening the door where there could be potential risk and vulnerabilities there, because again, you're not managing that and you're not controlling what's included in that. So Kieran's going to jump in, talk a little bit on the side, the self-hosted side, building it yourself, and then we'll look at another area.
Thank you so much, Sean. When it comes to in-house or self-hosted LLMs, the biggest advantage is that you have the full accountability. You're going to manage, you're going to compute, storage, patch management, and uptime as well. So, but the moment when you bring that model in-house, you're not just deploying the LLM, you're building the entire AI stacks. That means that you're responsible for its security end to end. Currently, I was discussing internally as well. The statistics shows around 50% of the large enterprise self-hosting AI reported a major infrastructure event in 2024. Some of the important key area we need to focus when we are going with self-hosted LLM. The first and foremost where it starts is the deployment standpoint. So you need to deploy securely. So you are setting up your own service or GPU. Next comes is the visibility standpoint. That is secure monitoring. Once your LLM is up and running, you need to keep an eye on how it's behaving. So as Adi mentioned earlier, so set up a SIM system that capture logs, access pattern, and a model usage. With self-hosting, you have an advantage of capturing the log and monitoring as well. Additionally, the most important is that adding the anomaly detection as well, so that you can even catch the unusual activity as well. So the next is also regularly conducting the routine stress test, which is the most important. Before shifting the software, you should test and regularly make sure that you conduct a red teaming exercise as well. The most important or the flexibility in self-hosted LLMs is the architecture standpoint, which is modular architecture. When you separate how the process input, how the model runs, and how the outputs are used, you will have the completely flexibility and so that you can rebuild everything from the scratch. Most importantly, the version control, you need to make sure track everything. When you fine tune a module, sometimes if it doesn't work, you can go back, which is nothing rollback model as well. Finally, on the open source standpoint, so it's always recommended to use the proven framework, so that there are a lot of open source, but we need to make sure as a mitigation strategy standpoint, use which is the proven one. At the same point of time, whenever on the deployment stand, make sure you patch everything, isolate the environment. This is one of the biggest mitigation strategy when it comes to hosts. At the same point of time, regularly look at the use case as well when it comes to monitoring, real-time alerts you will be getting. So look at the model, how it is being getting changed as well. When it comes to stress tests, as told, the red teaming exercise is one of the best one. And look at some of the injections, prompt injection as per the OWASP top 10 securities as well. Now, one of the biggest advantage of the self-hosting is the flexibility standpoint. When you're self-hosting, you get true flexibility. You can plug and play models and you can change architecture as well. You can maintain the version control as well, whichever is more relevant to you, you can change it as well. But at the same point of time, in conclusion, that it gives you a lot of control, but it also demands strong security practice in-house as well, so that you have a strong team in place to manage all these requirements. Yeah.
So now we're going to talk about something that's near to all of us, which is data governance, security, and compliance, which I'm going to let the two experts on this call. Sean's going to continue talking about third-party tools and LLMs, and Kiran's going to talk about aspects associated to self-hosted and self-built LLMs.
As I said earlier, we're talking amongst this group. I said this is the Accorian slide here. This is our money slide, because I mean, at the end of the day, this is what we do. This is where we have built our practice around these areas, and we want to make sure that organizations understand these best practices. And again, I'll emphasize, this applies across the board. But when we're looking at AI from a best practice standpoint, or what we should be doing from a governance standpoint, there's key areas here, and we'll talk through several of these. But things like limited data sharing. One of the key things to understand, this goes back to the old, hey, once it's on the internet, it never goes away. And you guys remember all those college pictures, or those things that we wish we'd never said that come back and haunt us later on because we posted to Facebook or one of the other socials. Same thing applies here. If you're uploading data to an LLM on a public LLM, it's out there, and there's nothing you can do about it now. It's gone. The whole world has it. So, as best practices for data minimization, having a long, hard way to say that word today. Send only essential data, to the LLM. If you can avoid uploading full documents or uploading, a whole slew of details around, what you're trying to do or information about your organization, you want to limit that as much as you possibly can. And again, make sure you're sanitizing it to only put up the core stuff that you need up there. Make sure that you have a differential policy for privacy. Use methods that introduce slight randomness to protect individual data points. Make sure, as most of you who've played with like ChatGPT or, some of the other ones out there, I think DeepSeek's been notorious about this of late, where, if you ask the same question 3-4 times, about the third or fourth time, you end up start getting an opinion as opposed to a fact. And that's interesting because, again, it's starting to say, wait a minute, why am I being asked this question so many times? What am I being asked? And then it's really, kind of manipulating and changing the response. So again, you want to make sure you're being very concise and precise with those type of queries going in. We can go through things like contractual clauses. And again, this is really just around protecting yourself around, with those SLAs. I think the other big thing here that I wanted to call out is if you are looking at third parties, make sure you have the ability to understand, and that organization has to report to you any type of breach disclosures. And in the AI world right now, it's a little complicated trying to get that information because, what truly in the AI world is a breach? If somebody uploads something, is it their responsibility to make sure that that information, that private information is not being disseminated when they didn't do it? But, you need to make sure you have language, contractual language that protects you from that perspective. Zero trust, authentication enforcement, again, across the board, mutual TLS and OAuth tokens, make sure these things are working correctly, they're configured correctly. Micro segmentation as well. And this is a key one. Only allow approved systems or users approved to access model endpoints based on least privileges. So again, it's a little difficult when we're looking at, what information we need to gather and who needs to get that from within the organization. But you really need to, when you're looking at your access controls and you're looking at that, who gets access to what's those privilege rankings within the organization, make sure that you're looking at this going, okay, what information does this individual or this role need from this, especially if it's personal information about the organization. And again, remember, what you upload becomes available for anybody who has access to that data model. Regulatory compliance and certification. Again, I mentioned a little bit about this on the previous slide. We have to look at what are the standards specifically around AI for things like SOC 2 and ISO. We'll talk more about these, even in the federal side of the house. We want to make sure, that we're following those standards. We understand what those standards mean. And again, we'll talk a little bit more later on about what the differentiators are between those standards. Audit logging, again, same sort of thing. Normal best practices we should have out here. And then I kind of circling back a little bit, vendor incident escalation. And this is really making sure that you have SLAs in your agreement with your third-party provider that allows you some control over when there's issues that take place, if there's breaches on their side or yours, that you guys have a two-way street and be able to communicate what stays out there, what comes down, what you get access to, what people shouldn't get access to. And then, supplier supplemental logging, again, best practice. We should be doing this across the board. If there's transactions taking place within the organization, from a compliance and technical standpoint, we should be logging it. We should know what's going on, who's doing what within the organization. And then for the last piece of this, incident response, joint drills, tabletops. We want to make sure that we're including these reviews, that your personnel in your organization understand what their roles and responsibilities are when it comes to an incident. What is an incident? Technically, we got to make sure we classify that as well. And then what are those escalation points? What are those communication points? So as we go through those tabletops and those drills, you walk through and make sure these people in the organizations understand what they're supposed to be doing and when. So that covers the third-party side, and Karen's going to jump on the self-hosted side.
Hey, thanks so much, Sean. Now, the contrast that with the in-house or the self-hosted LLM is that, in a simple terms, you own the complete pipeline. You have the complete control. You can define what gets logged and for how long as well. But the flip side, I just want to give you an example. 1 in 3 organizations struggle with the compliance audit due to it may be the poor logging or the traceability standpoint. So this is a common problem where the large organizations face. And also, surprisingly, statistics shows that 48% of the firm had employees unknowingly share confidential information with the vendor AI. So with having the full gain control, you also take in regulatory burden as well, such as GDPR, HIPAA, PCI. Everything becomes your responsibility. So again, with the stats of 21% of stalled AI projects cited data privacy hurdle as well. Even when you have the self-hosted, the biggest chunk would be the compliance requirement as well. So what do you need to do when it comes to the compliance or related to managing the in-house standpoint? I would say whatever is shown, it's copy-paste, nothing changed. But only thing is that on the role-based access control, because as you own the data which has been in your control, this becomes very critical. You have to define the query, the model, who can fine-tune it, and also who can touch the underlying data. That's the most important. For example, in the encryption tokenization standpoint, when data is at rest and or in the transit as well. So how do you manage those things? That comes to very important because you are having the complete control. In fact, the complete data lifecycle policy. So you need to define and enforce what data is collected and how long it should be stored and how should be purged. That's the most important when it comes to self-hosting. And also now coming importantly, the security and the compliance. You own the complete stack right now. So how do you, it's not only about installing the firewall, it's about end-to-end control and the reliability as well when it comes to in-house setup. So what we have to do, for example, as I told earlier, deploying the policy enforcement mechanism, or you can come out with the compliance by design. So looking at the best frameworks such as ISO 42001 or any NIST AI framework as well, connecting risk assessment. So by this, you also can maintain a complete transparency as well. I agree it's heavier, but it also allows you to embed the regulatory alignment from day one. Also, the most important thing is the visibility standpoint on the monitoring. So that's the most important which you need to look at. Another part we need to look at is the incident playbook. So have a tailored playbooks for things like prompt injection or data exposure, or for that matter, unauthorized model updates as well. And these are the most important, I would stress on the incident playbooks. Again, the reason behind why I'm stressing this one is because stats shows that 43% of in-house AI user experience model poisoning, or for that matter, the data tampering attempts in 2024. If you're running the LLM in-house, you control the data, but you also enforce the policies as well. You get the complete customization, but you also own the compliance risk as well. You have the deep visibility, but you're also responsible for rapid detection and the response time.
Cool. Thank you, Karen.
Yeah.
So doing a quick time check as we go along, we underestimated the time on this one, so I'm going to go a bit quicker through these and skip one. So why does AI security matter, right? If you look at overall AI security, why does it matter? For a couple of reasons. One is when you look at enhanced risk management, right? What are the vulnerabilities? How are you mitigating them? Thinking that through. Both Karen and Sean did an excellent job talking about some of the risks involved, whether you do a self-hosted or a third-party LLM. So how do you manage that risk? Becomes part of why a security standard matters, right? Accounting for regulatory compliance, those are changing. There are more and more regulations coming in place because AI is new. And so whatever security standard you go with, whether it's ISO, NIST, HITRUST, thinking through what accountability and compliance comes with that from a regulatory perspective. What's also different about AI in general is it's self-learning, right? So unlike other events or tools or products, AI over time is going to change. The answer is going to change. So how do you monitor it? How are you going to reassess the validation of that, right? So part of that is quality, which is really not our focus, but part of it is security. And so the security side becomes important. And lastly, because it is so new, a lot of our customers are saying, how do I prove out I've thought through security, I've thought through governance, I've thought through continuous monitoring, and what of the many standards that are out there, many certifications that are out there, is the right one based on my domain, my industry, and how long does that take to get, right? So AI security standards have become important. Frankly, it's also the Wild West, right? So you'll get all sorts of standards coming out, and over time, I'm sure the industries will gravitate towards a couple. But right now, with so many different standards, where do you go as a company? Where do you focus? Should you pick one up, and why, right? So I think Sean's going to talk a bit about that, or I'm going to talk a bit more about it, and then Sean's going to talk about it. But very quickly, there are multiple options. So which one makes sense? Why? What are the benefits of that, right, to your industry? And some of them are very industry specific. So if you're in healthcare versus fintech, there might be different things that make sense for you. And then how does it matter from an ethical perspective, data protection perspective, regulatory perspective? So for example, if you're in Europe, you might gravitate towards one standard versus the States. If you have different domains or that you're focused on, again, that would affect where you go. So those are some of the thoughts as you're thinking about not only security, but compliance. Which one should I care about and why? Yep. Sean, all to you.
Yeah, and I'll just touch on these next two slides. Really just breaks down the right now the 5 primary AI standards or frameworks that are out there right now, and there's a lot of work that's been put into these. So these organizations have been seriously looking at what AI means in these different environments and how they apply to their core standards. I know for a fact with HITRUST, myself and another one of my team members, we work directly with HITRUST on the AI Council to develop both the HITRUST AI RMF risk management framework as well as their certification. So, and they're 2 completely different things, and I won't get into a lot of detail with that. But when you're looking at what standards you should be following, or what would be a good idea, ask yourself a couple of questions. What is your end goal here? What are we looking for? So if you're doing in-house development and you're having to build your own model, or you're building code or something that's pulling from a model, whether it be third party or in-house, then you need to be looking at like the OWASP top 10. From that perspective, the ISO 23894 as well. Those are going to give you foundational development controls for AI. And then what you want to look at from that other part of that, or the second side of that, is what am I trying to achieve from a standards, privacy, policy, procedure, control type approach. And then we would look at where are we from either a certification or just trying to manage the standards within my security program. So, ISO 42001 and HITRUST both have a certifiable framework. And that's something we can help you guys work through, figure out, how to prep for it and work with it. And as I mentioned before, HITRUST also has an AI risk management, framework as well, where it's more around the prepping for the implementation of your LLM and the use of your LLM within your organization. So again, it's helping build you to whatever standard you're trying to get to. And these range in complexity, and they range in the amount of effort that you need to put in. With HITRUST, you have to do it in conjunction with a HITRUST certification, with any of the 3 available certifications. the E1, the I1, or the R2. With the ISO and the other frameworks, you can do those independently. And I think we're going to later on here give a couple of examples where some of this might apply to your organization as well. So again, we'll share out these this slide deck, and you guys will be able to see some of this core information here on these next two slides. And it really just breaks down what the value is and how they would apply, each framework would apply to your organization based off of what you're looking to do and what you need, where your industry is. So
I'll just move to the next slide so it has a bit.
Yeah, just go to the next slide. And
yeah, I did.
Yeah,
so you have that.
And again, just more detail around it. I think probably the big thing when you're looking at which standard to follow is right there, right in the middle when it looks at acceptance. What standards, do you need to follow based off of what your organization is doing or your application or environment that we're specifically looking at here that's in scope. So again, when we're trying to narrow this down, which one should you follow? Those are going to be key questions we're looking for. And also, I think the other thing too is looking at where you're using AI, because again, if you're building your own model and you're using it to support functionality within applications and your organization versus just using it as an end user, as a query tool, those are two completely separate paths that need to be addressed. So we'll look at more standards for the implementation and the use, and then we'll look at say like more acceptable use policies and end user policies within your organization on how they're allowed to be using AI within your organization and with your data.
And so I think, sorry, Sean, but
No,
as you're thinking about AI and what makes sense and whether you host it, whether you use a third party, and then what security standard or compliance standard do you want to do, that's where we come in, right? You can always rely on us and come back and say, hey, this is how we're approaching it. What should we be doing? What should we be avoiding, and why, right? That's part of the dialogue we'd have to go into. But we wanted to give you some ideas of which ones make sense. So a couple of clients and what they're focused on, and talk about what did they do. So some implementation stories, if you will, high level again. So I'll pick on them. I'll go from through the quadrants. But health tech SaaS company, if you're a health tech SaaS company using third-party AI integrations, what makes sense, right? You most only have a SOC 2 or a HITRUST, but then where should you go next? So Sean or Karen or Aditya, thoughts on, for a company like that, how should they be looking at what's compliance standard makes sense?
So what we would normally look for here is we'd come up with a combination approach. We'd look at like a SOC 2 plus HIPAA. And again, depending on, if they had a HITRUST, what level of HITRUST they had, was HIPAA included in their HITRUST? So again, we'd have to tailor it directly to the organization. And then we would go back and say, okay, at what level are you using AI? Kind of what I mentioned, a couple minutes ago, where is it, embedded? Are you using an internal model, a third-party model? What's your level of AI use there? So again, we would take a look at this and say, do we just need to start doing best practices? Look at the AI, the HITRUST AI risk management framework, and say, let's start building to this here. Or are you in a situation where you're actually deploying AI out in your environment, within your applications? Does a certification mean something to you? So we would want to make sure that we're looking at that AI risk management process within your organization. And then, take a look at, how best to approach that. How do we secure the APIs if you're using a third party? How do you manage, the learning model itself within your organization if it's your own?
Cool. And I know there are a number of people asking questions on the chat side. I see that coming through. I don't know if we're going to get through all the questions. I'm pretty sure we won't get through all the questions in this deck, in this webinar. We'll follow up individually where we can. It sounds like we might have to do a follow-on to some of this. So I'm going to take a couple of other examples. Large enterprise, I'm using popular Copilot software. So I'm not building my own LLM. I'm just using Copilot. What should I care about? How should I secure it? How should I think about this? Aditya, thoughts on that one?
So if you're building your own, if you're adopting a third-party Copilot software, right? Then you're going to essentially look at extending out your SOC 2, right? Add this Copilot software or tool into your overall scope for compliance, right? And also define an internal AI responsible framework or responsible AI framework, which looks in the top pillars associated security, ethics, and the likes of policy and the likes of them, right? So extend out your SOC 2, include this Copilot software in your SOC 2 scope, and then create and build an internal responsible AI framework.
Cool. Let's take two more. Fintech analytics company. So the analytics company, they're building their own LLM, they're self-hosting it. So the exact opposite of maybe the large enterprise in this example. What makes sense there? Again, these are high level. Each one will depend on more nuances than we're getting into in this one.
Yeah, I'll take up this one. Especially when it comes to fintech, I would recommend going for ISO 42001, which is an AI management system, because this standard also helps the organization to enforce the compliance by design, from privacy impact assessment to the review rights as well. It has a proper governance structure, and you also need to maintain the AI asset register for tracking model versions, data set, and the configurations. Along with the ISO 42001, I would also recommend two more standards or framework, which is NIST AI Risk Management Framework, which is beautifully drafted. It gives the organization end-to-end risk analysis across the pillars such as mapping, measure, and also how do you manage and the governance standpoint. And lastly, I would suggest the best is OWASP Top 10. That gives a lot of very good injection in place. They have beautifully, having the threat attack vectors, which has been listed down. So these three, what I would recommend.
Sorry, I was smiling on the beautifully drafted. Not too many people look at compliance frameworks and think of beautifully drafted as the right words, but Karen definitely does, which is great. And then last one, government contractor with classified research, in-house LLM. What would we look different there?
I think really, I mean, the big thing with the government stuff is staying within the framework of FedRAMP or CMMC, depending on how we need to approach that client. There are specifics within those frameworks, as Karen mentioned, with the NIST side of the house. So we would probably follow those lines with the NIST side, as they would align, directly with FedRAMP and CMMC, especially level 2. As we get to level 3 in CMMC, it's going to get more complicated. Obviously, it's a much higher level standard there. But again, following the best practices, implementing from that perspective, we could look at additional, standards like SOC 2, Type 2s. If the organization's doing both government related and external client related stuff, we would do crossovers with that as well. So again, could be very prescriptive based off the need, but if it was strictly just working with a government contractor, we would probably stay pretty much in line with the NIST standards today, and then follow whatever additional needs would be out there based off of how they're utilizing AI in the environment.
Cool.
Great.
Sorry, go on.
So I think these are some implementation stories of what have customers done. I want to talk about how Accorian's really helped organization, and a bunch of our customers in adopting GenAI and especially integrating it into their current compliance program. So whether they're looking at whether they had an existing ISO 27001, a SOC 2, a PCI, a HITRUST, or a HIPAA, and they're adding a third-party LLM, they're self-hosting an open source LLM, or they're going with a third-party, enterprise AI tool. We've been able to bring these into scope, look at the risks associated to it, do gap assessment, readiness associated to it, help write policies and procedures and implementation, and call out what needs to be done in order to safely bring these on board, and then integrate them into their existing compliance program, right? So my next slide talks about exactly how did we do that, right? So we've broken it up into 4 parts. The first is developing unified security policies, right? And that was an important aspect of it, right? Which was we need to take the existing security policies and adding a flavor of AI, right? So whether it's adding language to the acceptable use policy, whether it's adding language to access review procedure, whether it's adding language to the penetration testing procedure and adding elements associated prompt testing. All of these became essential, along with looking at additional implementations that one may have to look at, like Sean mentioned, which was zero trust or key management or auth token management and the likes of them, and of course IAM as well, right? We also worked with them on conducting a lot of AI-specific assessments and audits, whether it's across the standards like ISO 42001 or the NIST AI RMF, or HITRUST AI certification, which was an add-on to the existing HITRUST certification. We were able to do this to truly assess whether their current implementation of AI was truly complying with their internal security requirements and truly whether it was meeting their clients' assurance requirements. The next was implementing or helping them implement more AI-specific testing, whether QA, whether prompt testing, prompting injection, preventing prompt injection type attacks, and further threat monitoring, which is anomaly detection, looking at what kind of input was added or put in, whether PII was dropped into any of these LLMs, whether the output coming back was hallucinating, so looking at anomalies from a threat standpoint and taking all of this logs and plugging it into your MD or a SIM. And lastly, the most important aspect was cross-departmental training, right? So, it's very, very important to have very specific AI training on the security awareness front for all of your, power users, for all of your AI users, telling them what's okay, what's not okay, how to securely use AI, helping them understand and reviewing for hallucination, helping them understand what are the compliance implications of what they're doing, teaching them how to be more accountable, and finally defining who's the risk owner for that particular AI tool that might be used by sales or marketing, by any support function, right? Very, very important to do that, right? And it's very, very important to bring in the business side, because they of course want to adopt AI rapidly, but helping them understand what are some of the implications of security and then driving it through secure implementation and policy, right? So a bunch of things that we've been working with, the likes of Sean, Kiran and their teams, helping organizations, start right from the scoping side to readiness, to writing up policy procedures, to helping them understand what remediation do they need to have, what controls do they have to have, like, for example, browser-based DLPs, etc. Right? So a bunch of things that we're doing at Accorian, and it's exciting times as we see, the entire growth with AI.
Cool. No, I appreciate that. There's a lot here. I know there's a lot to unpack in this deck and a lot of thought that you need to put into it in terms of what framework makes sense. Feel free to reach out to us, have those conversations. I know we're over time. If you do have questions, I know we answered some questions right in the chat to specific folks. Please email us. We'll get back to you. We will send the deck out. We do have a security framework guide that's out there. You can download it right from the website. Although you should never use a QR code, we decided to put one up so that you can go do that and download it as well. But it is interesting. You can't be too ahead of this. Your company is using AI, whether you know it or not. And it's kind of like the cloud days or the SaaS days, right? You're either with them and you can't really, it's not really stopping it. It's how do you govern it? How do you make sure there are guardrails around it? And doing it so that your enterprise doesn't get affected in a negative way. So any way we can help, please let us know. And then we'll answer any questions you might have offline as well. Aditya, anything else from a last words perspective?
No, I mean, whatever you do, securely implement your AI. And if you have any questions, we're all here, to help you through this entire journey. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.